I'm Josh Trett. I'm sort of one half of production company Trett Films, and I'm also the writer director of Dial.
I'm Matthew Trett. I'm the other half of Trett Films and the cinematographer and producer of Dial.
So can you start off by telling us a little bit about Dial, and what it's about?
Yeah, Dial is a drama horror about Dani, who is a kind of she's kind of had to let her life go a bit to look after her mum, who is suffering from dementia. So it's kind of like taking over her whole life. She doesn't really see any friends, doesn't go out or anything. Her role has just become carer. And she has kind of a off and on relationship with her mum, and that they're not really connecting. And then this is a little bit of a spoiler, but this happens quite early in. The mother dies, and there's a lot of spookiness going on with the phone that she used to use quite a lot. And the film kind of it kind of hints and themes of kind of loss and kind of misconnections. And yeah, it's a bit of a spooky, emotional film. So it's a little bit of everything in there.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up. I think I haven't got much of that today.
Taking the words out.
Yeah.
Where exactly did this story come from? Why did you want to tell the story?
It was a couple of different things. Sort of around the time I started to write the script. Mine and Mattie's grandma had died, so there was stuff going on around with my mum and her siblings, who are my aunt and uncles, selling her house, and I had a dream around them selling the house, and there was a point in the dream where I was able to speak to my grandma on the phone, and meanwhile the neighbors were all sort of practicing black magic and trying to get into the house. So this kind of strange dream around sort of stuff that was, obviously stuff that was not happening, but also there was clearly something more subconscious around real life events. I kind of just took that idea and ran with it into the script that it is now. Sort of spoke about it to Matty and said, I had this idea for a film. What do you think? And he said, yeah, go for it. So the first scene I wrote was actually that scene. It's kind of in the middle of the film about the disconnected, where the engineer says that the phone has never been disconnected. So that was the first idea I had. It was the first scene I wrote, and then everything else kind of came from that, really.
I think one of the most provocative things of the film was the use of atmosphere. And obviously, that is a big part of when telling a horror story. Um, the use of light and audio in particular was very evocative. Can you talk a little bit about how you created the atmosphere for this film?
Sure. I mean, I like to take a lot of the credit, but to be honest, a lot of the credit goes to the location we found, which was just was it Airbnb, Josh, or was it like one of those kind of like you just rent it out for a
Yeah.
weekend, whatever. But this location, the first one we looked at was just amazing. Like it had so much. It was kind of it had that creepiness, but a creepiness that was realistic. Like you could actually live in that house. But it had a bit of like it kind of felt like something there was a past to it. And so a lot of that character just came from the location. We didn't do too much like set dressing on this. We added a few lights in here and there, but a lot of it was just like that was how it is. So we got really lucky with that. In terms of other stuff, in terms of yeah, in terms of kind of lying into that atmosphere, the lighting, I used a lot of lamps. I wanted to make it feel real. Um, and one of the things I like as a cinematographer is the use of shadows. Like I really, really like you can do I think you can do as much with shadows as you can with light. And it's such like it brings so much like, I don't know, atmosphere to it, which is kind of creepy, but also I think that the thing I wanted to get in Dial is that it just all feels like real. It doesn't feel like we've just kind of lit it to be like cobwebs and ghosts around the corner. I wanted it to feel really like realistic, but also very claustrophobic.
Mm.
And apparently that's come across quite well because we're getting a lot of comments about that. So I'm pleased to hear it.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and I think early on we had a conversation about the sort of vibe of the film. It was never intended to be like a jump scare every few seconds and do cheap scares, and it was definitely never intended to be like body horror or gory or anything like that. So we knew going in that we wanted the sort of creepiness to be something that you felt all the way through, even if you couldn't quite put your finger on it, rather than it just being like a scare a minute. So it was always in some way built to be like that. And obviously a lot of it comes through in post production too. Like it's good filmmaking is all of those elements coming together from the script writing to the direction to cinematography, and also how long do we hold on to these shots for? And I've made short films before, specifically horror ones, where I'd got into cutting too much and it broke the tension too soon. So I knew going into this one, let's just hold out and drag on these scenes a little long, even longer than they feel like they should be a little bit, and that helps build some of the tension. When you build that in with the sound design and the music, and we had a really good composer for this guy called Phil Archer, and we had a guy work on sound as well. All of those things coming together is what helps really build that atmosphere and help tell the story, I think.
So why a horror? So this film obviously is about grief, it's about loss. Why did you want to tell this particular story and these emotions through a horror?
I think horror is a really good genre for exploring sort of the sort of human condition, really, in so many of its aspects. And as sort of a young film viewer, I was really into those kind of films I mentioned. I was really into sort of like Eli Roth's and those kind of like gory side of things. But really, as I kind of came to enjoy horror as a genre as an adult, it was a lot more about those psychological horror, whether it's films or books or games or whatever, really. And and so it just seemed like the best way to do it. And a filmmaker I really admire in sort of contemporary time is a guy called Mike Flanagan, and he's really good at sort of those really creepy films, but actually they're really about the people in them, and it's not about sort of even Midnight Mass is about vampires, but it's not really about vampires. It's about the people, and that's the horror stuff in it. But also, what's ultimately really nice about his stuff is there's a real poetic romance to a lot of his stuff as well, and I was really inspired by that approach, and that was something we carried through into Dar. As much as it was a horror film, I think a lot of times to sort of people that aren't too into the genre, when you say horror, they might think of just it being like an exploitation film and something that's quite nasty. And that's not what this was ever supposed to be. It's supposed to be a horror film, but does have that poetic edge. And I really wanted it to end with a bittersweet feeling, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I reflect a lot of that. Like, I do think horror is one of those genres which is so broad that you can really do anything in horror. Like, and horror is kind of like it's also part of life. Like, life can be scary, and life has these kind of like creepy moments. And it's doing horror in a way that feels. I mean, there are parts of Dahl where it's like that is. I mean, people aren't always getting called up with creepy phone calls and finding weird weird stuff in their houses, but that the kind of themes of Dial really lend themselves well to horror. And yeah, as Josh said, also the one approach that we thought straight out was this is a horror film that isn't, there's not a drop of blood in the film. No one gets stabbed. Because there's space for those kind of horror films, but that's not really what we wanted to approach with this. It's like some of the more effective and scary horror films to us were those kind of more kind of like psychological and horror films that just feel very relatable.
Yeah, and I still think, as much as we did want to have those kind of bittersweet moments in, it's still scary themes, like ultimately horror films, whatever genre, whatever kind of subgenre of horror they're in, they ultimately explore like for something that's very scary is death. And the next thing scary to that maybe is like losing people you love as well and them dying too. And I think the film really explores that. That's the main focus of the film, really. So that's one reason I think horror made so much sense. Is like this is something that's really scary to a lot of people. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of why we ended up in that genre, I think.
So your actors, in addition to creating the atmosphere, your actors do a really brilliant job. They give great performances and they add a lot to the story and able to communicate the feelings of the narrative. How do you work with your actors to build their characters and to get these sort of performances?
I think like one thing that me and Matty focus on in both are like short film work, but also the paid work that makes up our day job as a production company, Trett Films, is if we can get the casting right, then it just makes everything so much easier. And there's times where if you get the casting wrong, it just makes the process so much harder. And if you get the casting good, then it's just a big your job is already done that way. And so Liv, who plays Dani in the film, we had worked with her on a sort of corporate commercial project, basically. But it was something where she, even though it was a corporate video, it was something that was very story driven, like ultimately a short film, really. And she in that had to play the role mostly silent. I don't entirely silent. I don't think she had to say anything, right, May? There was no lines in that. Well,
Yeah,
there
yeah,
is a
no
voice,
voiceover, but yeah,
like
the actual
yeah,
silent.
and she had to play like multiple ages too, and we hadn't actually met her prior to shooting because the client chose her. But I think we were really impressed. So it was kind of an easy choice to pick her, and she had a dance background mostly too, and I think that's what really helped her do a lot of those sorts, because it's a mostly silent film. There's bits of dialogue, but a lot of her performance comes from small gestures, and I think her being a dramatic actor, but also her dance background really helped with that too. And she had some really challenging stuff. The camera was a lot of the time right up into her face, and so she had to really get those subtleties across. But I think she trusted me and Matty as filmmakers because we had worked with her before, and knew that she was in a sort of safe environment anyway, but also a safe environment to really like do the best that she could. Mm. And we knew that she was a talented actress as well, so we had faith in her ultimately, and I think that's why that worked so well. With Denise, who played the mother, though, I mean, we wanted someone who kind of had a certain caliber of performance in it. She was obviously a few older than Liv was, because it was basically Liv's first film role. So she had done a few different film roles of different things, and she was a lot more. She really challenged me on the character and challenged me on the script during the like pre-production meetings. We had a lot of sort of Zoom calls like this, just sort of discussing the character and discussing the script. And she had a lot of questions for me to make sure that she really understood the character in the film she was in, basically. And I tried to answer those as best as I could. Ultimately, it's a film that's kind of, it's a short film. There's only so much you can explore in that. And it's a short film that has supernatural elements to it. So I couldn't ground all of the answers in some sort of reality, but she needed that to sort of give her performance some sort of, grounded reality, I guess. And I think that's kind of what worked there.
Yeah, I think it's also kind of important as well, and this is what we had on Dial, is that you work with people that want to be there, especially at the scale we're doing. Like, we're not, we paid everyone as much as we could, but obviously we were working with such a small budget on this film. You kind of wanted to get that feeling that everyone wanted to be there. Everyone wanted to make this the best film they could, and we definitely found that in the cast for Dial. Like, we were doing long days filming. Like, we had to squeeze it all in, what, 3 days, maybe 2.5 days or something in terms of filming. But after a hard day's work, we all kind of sat in the kitchen together, and we were all having dinner, and just kind of like just talking, and that made things work because no one was jetting off in their private jets to go and leave the set or stuff. That everyone got on together, and that really, I think, reflects in the film as well.
So you recently had some sold out screenings, where you screened the film in both Norwich and London. How was the audience reaction to the film?
Yeah, it was very
really
positive. People are really kind of like, I think the one thing that we spoke about the whole way through this film is making it something that people can relate to, but also as a horror and has got emotional side. The biggest thing you want from an audience is for them to respond to that, and definitely did. There's people in the audience who were scared, people who were kind of upset by the end of the film. That's exactly what we wanted. So it's been a really good response.
Yeah. Our premiere was at Cinema City in Norwich, which I was really keen to get for our sort of premiere, really, because that's where the business is based and it's where I live. So that was, and I didn't know who would sort of turn up, so we just kind of sent out a few emails to people that were involved in the film, a few clients and a few friends, and very quickly we ran out of tickets. So I was like, oh well. So then there was like last minute scramble to make sure that people that dropped out, we could then get someone to come in and take their seat. But it was a really sort of overwhelming response, actually. And then the one at BFI was really good too. And also since then we played at a film festival called Fear and the Fens Festival, which was another packed out screening, to the point where I didn't get a ticket myself. I had to kind of sit in the sort of side seat on the edge. But again, that was a really nice response. I mean, that was a room of horror fans as well. So I was a little more anxious about how they would take it. Like, it's a genre they probably take ownership over, and it was a day full of horror films as well. So if this kind of didn't sit right with them and they were getting fatigue of the genre, I kind of would be a little bit nervous about that. But people on that screen too, they came up to me around the film playing and said how much they loved it, and they did really enjoy the sort of real life horror elements it explored. And that one had an award. It won an award at that festival too, and that was voted for by the audience. So that was very. So I was very sort of pleased that people responded to it. there as well. And we're part of Norwich Film Festival now as well, which again it was a festival I really appreciate and look, and it means a lot to be playing part of Norwich Film Festival because the caliber of the films that play in that just seems to increase every year, and the scale of productions that are part of the selection increase every year for that as well. So that's really cool, and we're nominated for best East Anglian short in that one, and I think last I checked, the time of recording this, that's pretty much sold out as well. So it was a film that we paid quite a bit of money for to have mixed in 5.1, so it was really built for as much as it can. We wanted people to see it in a proper cinema, and so far that's kind of the only screenings it's had. So that's been really good.
Yeah, it's really good to hear people's response as well because obviously we've spent, I mean, I can't count the amount of times me and Joshua have watched this film at different stages of production because we edited it as well. And so by the time you get to the end of the film and it's done, you're always like, well, you've seen it so many times, you're like, is this actually good? But we've taken, obviously we finished the edit quite a few months ago now, and obviously we've been watching at the premieres and the screenings and stuff, and having that kind of space away from it and then you go back into it, I am pleased to say I do still really like the film. So that's a good thing, I guess, after all the work we put in. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think when you watch it with an audience, you're kind of watching it, you're kind of imagining how they're seeing it for the first time. So it doesn't feel like, oh, this is just me watching it in Premiere again, like Premiere Pro, like editing stage. I kind of feel like, okay, well, this is their first time seeing it. I'm in the same room as them, and the atmosphere is the same, so you're kind of seeing it through their perspective. And I've always kind of, when it played again at the Fear and the Fence Festival, I don't think, maybe it's not like the world on fire, but it finished, and I was like, this is done what I set out to do with it, basically, and that was a good feeling when I watched it again. I was like, I'm happy I achieved what I wanted to with it.
So I know Dial is still getting a lot of attention in the cinemas, but is there anything on the horizon for you guys? Any new projects that you're working on for the future?
Yes,
So
we're gonna. Sorry, you
sorry,
go.
Matt, go on. Do you want me to
As I
take
say,
that one
we've
or
got
you?
another short film that we're hoping to actually shoot. We're running out of time this year, but we're hoping to shoot it this year, if not early next. Which is probably a similar kind of scale to Dial in terms of like budget and cast and stuff. But the one thing that we wanted to do was always have something because obviously we do a lot of corporate work with our business. And having Dial as like kind of it was like our baby when we were doing all the corporate productions and like, okay, now we can just be so creative and just put everything into Dial. I kind of miss having that thing there. So I think, yeah, we've now got this other one. We've got a couple of drafts of the script now, and so hopefully we'll start rolling on that soon. And then obviously, like once we get that, our kind of overall plan is to get a feature film off the ground, which is like a million times more work. But doing these kind of short films is a great way for us to show like this is what we can do. Like these are films we're funding ourselves, but look what we can do with this small budget. Imagine if we had a lot of money, a lot more kind of like tools in our arsenal, that kind of thing. So yeah, we just want to make more films and just keep doing them, bigger and better until we get where we want to be, really.
Yeah, yeah, and the feature side of thing is, as Matty said, is going to be, that's something that there is a first draft of the script of, but writing is part of the. I'm always open to sort of working with screenwriters, but so far most of the stuff we've done at this point I've written myself, and I do find script writing so challenging because you kind of it's. I mean, I've not written any novels, so I don't know how it compares to writing books, but trying to just put words on an empty page for it to be cohesive, and then know at some point you're probably going to have to produce it. Like you can't just think up anything and be like, I'll worry about production later on because we're not working on that scale. Everything I write, I have to know that eventually I'm going to have to pull this off from a production standpoint and a direction standpoint and an editing standpoint, and that's really difficult. And so writing the feature, which I've not done before, is weird because it's like, well, I'm not writing 12 pages, I'm writing at least 90, and it is a different discipline to writing short film because the arcs have to go on longer and they have to feed into each other and things have to kind of work in that time frame. And just sitting at a desk and writing 90 pages of anything could be complete nonsense. It's still quite hard, but trying to write 90 pages of something that works as a 3x structure and follows a certain rules of screenwriting is really difficult. So, and balancing all this, as much as Matty said, these are really creatively satisfying and rewarding to do these. We don't actually make a profit off these at this point. Our profit comes from all the commercial and corporate stuff, which is very important to us as well. And we're in a very lucky position to be able to do that as our day job. But that's why it has to take the front seat, because there's clients who are paying us money to be able to deliver these kind of quite intensive and creative projects. And so we do these as and when we can, and as and when budgets allow. But yeah, we're always going to be doing them in some shape or form. And there's always stuff on the horizon that just takes longer than we'd like, I guess.
So it seems like you two are the two-man band. You do all the different aspects of the production. Besides the screenwriting, is there a part of the production that you find the most challenging when you're creating, whether your corporate films or your short films, your narrative films?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. I think one of the things that we struggled with in Dial, and also this becomes a big part in our corporate stuff as well, is music can be hard to
Mm.
land on to get the right thing. And we had a big problem with this in Dial because I mean, we use kind of like existing music. Like I was pulling songs from The Shining, and Josh, you found some from Hill House as well, which was like the inspiration for it. And you can get too attached to stuff as well, and that's one of the problems we had. And it wasn't until we got Phil Archer to make a score for us in the end for Dial, and he really like elevated those scenes with his music. But finding stuff originally that worked was difficult. And again, that, as I said, that is a problem in the corporate world, is that you find a song and you can get so attached to a song, you send it off to a client and like, I'm not too sure about this song. And you're like, that's the whole edit is relying on this. So there's always a difficult thing, but hopefully it gets there in the end. I just always find it's a lot of work to land on the correct song sometimes.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges isn't necessarily just one specific thing, but it is that multi-hat wearing. But that's something that we've become good at, multi-hat wearing, from having to do it like in from the business standpoint, because even if they're not necessarily like passion projects that we're doing for work, ultimately they are short films that need to be like pitched, scripted, filmed, edited, and delivered. And so you kind of become an expert at that after doing like however many we end up doing a year. So a lot of the times the skills feed one into another. But I think for me, the most challenging part is writing. And I'm not really ashamed to admit that that's a really hard thing to do. So people that can just sort of sit down and churn out scripts, I really admire. But, I think also it's kind of like, a muscle that you have to creatively train. Like the more you do it, the more you get into like a discipline. It's kind of like going to the gym, the better, really.
So I always like to end all of our interviews with this question. So Film East works with a lot of young people who are interested in film, and I often get people come to me asking questions about how do I make a film? I'm not a filmmaker. I will never take credit for being a filmmaker. And Film East is not a filmmaking organization. So whenever I get these opportunities to talk to people in the industry, I like to sort of create this collection of answers to this sort of question of how do you make a film? I think what people would really take away from it is maybe if you guys discuss about your corporate side versus your creative side, because I think a lot of people have this dreamy expectation that being a filmmaker is I get to make the projects that I want all the time, and maybe sort of grounding that idea in how do you make a profit versus how, still being able to create your creative projects.
Yeah, I do think it's actually quite similar because again, in the corporate world, you're not necessarily getting the clients you want, or doing when you start out, and this is what we had to do. I mean, we were taking on jobs for like £50 and you'd film like gigs, you'd film your friends, like whatever they had, like their parents' business, whatever. And you just do it to make like, it's not about the money, it's about making a portfolio when you start out. And that's the thing you have to do. You just have to, you can't just jump straight into producing like $1 million TV ad, whatever it is. Like, you have to start off on from the bottom basically, and you know, just film what you can. Like, go and film weddings, go and film like, a small business around the corner that doesn't necessarily have a budget. But if you can just keep creativity and keep your own voice when you start out, you can build it up. And yeah, you then, you get to the clients that you want to in the end. But yeah, you just have to do it and also stick with it. Like the amount of people that we speak to who kind of start out and it doesn't work in the first couple of months. So I know it is hard from the money. You have to make money to do it as a living, but you just have to keep doing it and just keep that love alive for it really.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing. And that's something I remember finding frustrating in sort of like early days of my career is that it wasn't taking the exact same trajectory as someone else's, and it wasn't taking the exact same time as someone else's. And that used to be a real sort of like frustrating point for me now. But now looking back, it's like that's just the way it is. And so there's some solace to take in that. It's like not everyone's route is going to be the same. And so like if it takes longer than it takes someone, like a peer of yours or something, that's fine. Like it is about that consistency because eventually it should work out. It is all about just sort of sticking with it for the long game. And I've had friends and people I went to uni with, people I went to college with that all studied video or film production at some point, and somewhere along the line they kind of gave up in it. And it's like I think maybe if they just kind of put it in a bit longer, then they would have had some success in it. But equally, I get it. Everyone's life situation is different. You've got bills to pay and all that kind of stuff, and you kind of have to cut it eventually. But when me and Matty decided to start Trett Films as a business, which was about 5 years ago now, we were both in jobs and we decided to sort of, it was time. It felt like the time was right to walk away from those and finally give this a shot. And if it worked, it worked. If it didn't, then we guess we'd go back and live with our parents and find full-time jobs again. But we were in a situation where we kind of were living at that point. So, our rent was low and we could kind of get by in that initial, like, we don't have much money coming in, but let's just kind of push through as long as we can. And ultimately it worked out, but there's a version of it where maybe we kind of just packed in sooner, it wouldn't have done. So I think that's the kind of thing I always think about is everyone's timeline of success is going to be different.
Great. Thank you, Josh and Maddie, for
No worries.
having this discussion today. When is your screening at the Norwich Film Festival for everyone?
That's on the 17th of November, but I think there's only when I checked, there's like one ticket available. So I don't know.
Someone needs to get in on that one ticket.
Yeah, someone better jump in quick. You can fight through it.
But I don't. Hopefully that's not the last one. It might end up being the last one for this year. But I'm hoping we have more screenings next year. Hopefully more film festival screenings, both sort of regionally and further afield. And then eventually we'll put it online for everyone to view it in some capacity. I haven't quite decided how we'll do that yet. But so a lot of film festivals don't like you releasing stuff if it's going to play at a film festival. But mostly that's not really a thing anymore. But we want everyone to sort of see it in a film festival or a cinema experience if they can, and then eventually we'll put it online sometime next year.
Fabulous. Thank you guys so much for talking with me today.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.